K-Talk Radio, July 15th, 1990. Religion on the Line with Martin Tanner as talk show host.
Howard Storm from Kentucky. Near-death experience happened when?
June 1st, 1985. At the time, 38 years old. Come to the belief when I was a late teenager that there was no afterlife. And very briefly, I was in a medical emergency that took place in Paris, France. What I looked down upon was my body lying in the bed. I was standing next to my bed, looking at myself lying in the bed. This was very upsetting to me because it's impossible, it can't happen, that you could be outside yourself, looking at yourself, but there I was, and I felt myself, and I felt myself that was standing next to the bed, and I felt whole and complete and real, and I thought that this must be a dream or something, except that my perceptions were very keen and aware, and I could see and taste and hear and touch the floor, but I could not communicate with my wife, who was on the other side of the bed, nor my roommate. And after trying to communicate with them in the most violent manner, I heard people calling me outside the room, and I left the room and went into the hallway. And when I went into the hallway, there was a haze or a fogginess out there, and there were people milling around calling me to come with them, and I went with them on a journey of many miles into this haze, and we walked and walked, never encountering any architecture or landscape, just walking in this haze on a flat surface. And in time, the haze grew darker and heavier, and the people that were trying to coerce me to go with them stayed away from me, and they never allowed me to get very close to them. They stayed 10 or 20 feet away from me, and so I never could make them out very clearly, except that they were human, male and female adults. I had a bad feeling about them and became increasingly hesitant to be with them. I got to the point where after going with them for what would have had to have been many miles, maybe dozens of miles of walking with them, I didn't want to go with them anymore because their tone was getting increasingly hostile and ugly towards me, and I was very afraid of them, and I told them that I wouldn't go with them any further, and at that point they started to push and shove me, and I started to fight back. There was innumerable ones of them all over, and the more I screamed and yelled in pain, the louder they all laughed and were delighted with my predicament. I could no longer fight them off anymore, and I was lying on the ground, and I was ripped and torn and humiliated in more ways than I care to describe. And as I lay there on the ground, a voice, which I recognized as my own voice, came and it seemed audibly from my chest and said to me, "Pray to God." And I thought at that time that I didn't believe in God and that there would be no sense in me praying to God. And the voice said again, "Pray to God." And I again began to question why I would do that. And for a third time, and very emphatically, the voice said, "Pray to God." And I thought, this situation's so hopeless, I may as well give it a try. And I tried to think of prayer was, which I had difficulty conceiving of since I hadn't prayed since I'd been a child. And I began to mutter a few bits and pieces of things that I could think of that I had learned either in church or at school. To my surprise, these beings that were around me started to scream and yell at me that there was no God and that I was more despicable, but they spoke with a great deal of vulgarity and earthiness, which I won't repeat, but they were very enraged that I was saying these things and asking for God's help. The angrier they got, the more it made me determined to say these things, and I started saying whatever I could that sounded like it came from Old English and sounded like holy words or holy phrases. And as I did this, they consistently backed off into the darkness further and further until I found myself alone in the darkness, just yelling out to it anything that I could think of that sounded religious. At that point, I was left on the ground, unable to move, completely disoriented, without any hope for a very long time. And I sank deeper and deeper into depression, lying there because there was no possibility of me moving, there was no escape, there was no way out. Laying there in that despair and hopelessness, a little nursery school hymn started going through my head, that Jesus loves me. And when I heard that go through my head, I desperately needed some help, and without any debate in my mind, I desperately wanted that to be true and thought that it could be true, and I yelled out into the darkness, "Please, Jesus, save me." And when I did that, a very faint star or light appeared in the darkness, and it very rapidly got brighter and brighter. And as I lay there, this indescribably brilliant and beautiful light came upon me and picked me up into it. And when it picked me up into it, I looked down upon my body in this brightness, and I saw that all the wounds and tears just disappeared. And I knew without any communication between myself and this brilliant, very beautiful being of light holding me, that I knew that it was very good, I knew it was very powerful, I knew it was extremely intelligent. I somehow knew that it knew me intimately, and most importantly of all, that this being loved me in a way that I had never known love could be, and had never experienced love before. And being soothed in it, I just simply cried my heart out in it, and I was crying sort of all the pain and hope and failure and happiness of my entire life at that time, and this being lifted me up and carried me just upward, moving moving slowly at first and then increasingly rapidly moving through space. And as we moved through space, I saw off in the distance what appeared to be a sky full of stars, and as we moved towards them, I realized that they weren't stars because they were all moving, and that they were similar to the being that was carrying me. And as we moved into this sky full of, I noticed that off in the distance there was a great concentration of light that everything seemed to be moving towards or away from, and that we were moving towards it. And as we moved towards it, I could feel emanating from it a sense of tremendous love and power, and it made me tremendously ashamed of myself. Felt so guilty about what I had believed and the manner that I had led my life before this time, that I thought to myself that this is all a terrible mistake, and they should put me back in the darkness where I belong, because I knew that back in the darkness I was with people whom I had been like. For the first time, my friend who was carrying me spoke to me in my mind, and he spoke to me in a male voice, young adult male, and he said, no, you do belong here, and we don't make mistakes. He called out, and some other angels of light came around and hung there in space around us, and they introduced themselves and began to speak to me and tried to make me feel comfortable. This was all done by them speaking directly into my mind, and although I couldn't read their mind, I could clearly understand in their different voices what they were saying to me in my mind. And they told me that they wanted to show me my life. They began to show me my life in chronological order from the beginning. I saw my life played out in front of me vividly, with myself as the central actor, and what they were trying to show me was simply how I had interacted with other people, or how I had failed to interact with other people in a loving manner, because as we saw my life, I could feel their emotions of sometimes joy, but often disappointment and disapproval at what I've done. And although there are many times when in this drama of my life that I was watching greatly disappoint them, I always felt that they still loved me, even though there were times when they were very upset about the things that I had done. And they asked me if I had any questions, and I said that I had a million questions, and they invited me to ask my questions, and I did. And they very patiently and carefully answered my questions and tried to make their answers simple enough so that I could understand them, because I had a very strong sense that their intelligence was like an adult trying to explaining things to a very small child.
Elaine, why don't you explain to our guests exactly what happened to you, and then we can discuss what it all means afterward. Where were you when this near-death experience of yours took place?
I was in Chicago. I live in South Bend, Indiana, and had been in Chicago taking classes in a floral art school there. And staying in a hotel room, on this particular night, I went into seizure. My body had suffered a stroke that I wasn't aware of. By 5 after 1, my heart had stopped for the second time. And I remember the priest coming close to my ear, telling me that I was a very sick little girl, and the doctors were doing all that they could to help me, but he wanted to pray and ask for God's help. I have to tell you that I was raised in a very fundamental, old-time church. I mean, it was just a very strict way of living. So on this particular night when this priest was going to pray for me, he prayed the last rites for me, but he prayed so much more. And it was a thing of beseeching God to reach out and touch me. And I could feel like waves of energy just kind of buffeting over my body. And then all at once it was as if my chest closed in. Steel bands had tightened around me, like a weight of, the only thing I could think to compare it to might be cement blocks stacked on top of me, type of thing. And all at once my thoughts were that I didn't realize that a person could be in that much pain and still be alive. And no sooner had the thought crossed my mind that I wasn't in my body. I was going into a very deep, dense, foggy area, like it would be along about dusk or early morning, pea soup type fog. And I wasn't afraid. I felt like that there were other beings that were out there around me. There were other people, though I didn't necessarily think of them as people. I just knew that there were others around me, and I wasn't afraid. And to my right, about horizon height, I saw a pinpoint of a light, like a bright star. And the minute I noticed it, I started moving toward it at a just really incredible way to see. It was almost like a magnet type of thing. It was moving toward me. I was going toward it. And I can't even begin to tell you, as I got closer to that light, the amount of love, the personality that this light had. It wasn't a blinding light. It wouldn't blind you like looking at the sun. It was like looking at a really bright, brilliant star, only so much more. And from this came so much love and so much understanding, so much caring, and I could feel forgiveness. And all of these kind of things rolled together. Talking to me from that light is not like me trying to find the words to explain it to you or to this radio audience, because it's a thing of something like maybe mental telepathy. It's I think that you know it, because you become one. And looking back toward the light, it conveyed to me that through me, It said, you have eternal life. And in that instant, I realized that the religious thing is death, that all we do is change reality. And all at once, I was enmeshed into that light, and I realized then everything got present. This was my creator, and all about me were little bitty sparkles,